there's a reason that it's called the lead, and it's not because you have the most lines.
Adventure as we explore how to be present and kind as we go about doing great things. And today I get to sit down and talk with Rob Lott. And he is an actor. He's been a director, producer. He's been in management in the Disney World down in Orlando and also in SeaWorld as well. And I met him at a conference last spring, and to hear an actor talk about leadership concepts, it was really intriguing. So I've been following Rob on Facebook, and I love his posts. He's doing a lot of quoting of different books that he's reading, so it's always interesting to see how people are feeding themselves. But I wanted to get Rob on here to explore some of his thoughts around being a creator and a creative person in the context of large organizations, but also as somebody who is working in the community even as we speak. So Rob, thanks for being here.
Oh my goodness, it's an honor. Thank you so much for having me, John.
So wanted to talk a little bit. You started off as where was it? In Ohio?
Yeah.
Green, Ohio?
Yes.
You were one of the Fighting Bulldogs at the high school.
That's right. There? Yeah, I always say I grew up in Green, Ohio, went to Green High School, where of course our colors were orange and black.
I've got to say, okay, so I'm coaching soccer right now, and I was late to the game. So we chose our team name before we got our uniforms. So one of the kids all agreed on, we're going to be the Blue Pirates.
Okay.
And of course, our uniforms are neon orange. So now all the kids are convinced that the color that we wear is neon orange, but it's also pirate blue.
Okay. All right. Well, whatever works for him.
So how did you get from Green, Ohio down to Orlando? And I don't mean by car.
Sure.
What's the journey there?
Yeah. So I'm a rare breed. It wasn't until I got to Orlando that I truly found my people. And when I say a rare breed, what I mean is I knew exactly what I wanted to do at a super young age. I knew that I wanted to be on stage. I knew that I wanted to be a performer. And when I say young age, I mean, I can't remember when I didn't want to do that. And I know that my parents were often in on-stage positions. So I would see my dad on stage talking to a whole bunch of people. My mom would be playing the piano. And I think I was drawn to that very early on. And so I ended up, as I grew up and taking every opportunity to be on stage, I got into school, and they had, of course, some music classes and things like that. And I loved the music class. I could not wait until Wednesday, because Wednesday was music class day, and I could not wait until Wednesday. And so Wednesday would get there, and I would be just thrilled and so excited to be there and trying out all the different instruments and singing the songs and doing the dances and things, everything that goes with elementary music education. And so I was like, how do I get to do more of this? And I get into junior high, and I say, hey, I would really love some more music classes and theater classes and that sort of thing. And they said, well, really, not until you're in high school do you get to have more of those music classes and theater classes and that sort of thing. I said, okay, all right. So I wait, and I get into high school, and I'm a freshman, and I say, okay, I'm here. I'm ready for my music classes and band and choir and theater and I'm ready for all of those classes. And they said, well, not really until you're an upperclassman are you going to get to do those things. And so I knew, oh my goodness, like this is something I could get into a whole thing of how they were actually the theater, the arts department was a little bit on the chopping block, and all of the town was all for those classes being taken away because, academics were important. And I would definitely argue at this point that academics were important, but I came alive through art classes and theater classes and music. And so my mom actually went to the school board meeting and stood up and shook her fist and said, no, there's a whole bunch of kids that rely on this, that they need this. And so the arts department was saved. And
Sounds like a Footloose moment.
it really was. Yeah, it was great. The arts department was saved, but I still wasn't able to really get, into it the way that I wanted to. I knew that I was ready to make this thing a lifestyle. And so long story short, some friends of mine who were upperclassmen when I was a lower classman in high school, they had went on to graduate and they were going to study theater in college. And I was like, oh my goodness. So I start talking to them and I say, so how is it? You're spending all of your days in acting classes and things. And they said, well, we're really not going to get to do any of that stuff till later. I said, oh my God, I'm done. I just want to start. And so I had a summer job after my senior year of high school. I had a summer job at a camp. And there was a guy who came in to be, the entertainment would be the wrong word, but he came in to just lead the gatherings every morning and every evening, and he had songs and he had skits and he had all the puppets and different things, and he actually tapped me into kind of being his assistant. Well, in having conversations with him, he said that he used to work at Disney, and so I chatted a little bit more about that. And at the end of the summer, I said, I would love. Do you still have any contacts at Disney? Could I tap into that a little bit? And he said, yeah, let me see if I can make some phone calls. And so he got me an audition in Orlando, and I was all set and ready to go to Ohio State. I was going to go to Ohio State. I was hopefully going to be in the Ohio State University Marching Band playing trumpet. I was very excited about that. But I had this audition down in Orlando. And so I came down and I said, okay, I'm just going to give it a go. If it works out, then it works out. If not, then I will go back up to Ohio and I will play in the marching band, if they'll have me. But instead I came down to Orlando and I auditioned and I got the gig. And the rest is history, so to say. That was kind of what got me there. That I just knew that I wanted to make. I would say to my teachers, I want to be in show business, and they would hear that as I want to be rich and famous. And they would say, the chances of that are pretty slim. And I've come to the realization, no, the chances of working in show business are enormous. You just got to go to where it's happening. Ken Coleman talks about the proximity principle. I just finished his book, The Proximity Principle, and one of the first steps is getting to where the action is happening. And so came down to Orlando and realized there's a whole bunch of people here who left their hometowns to make it big in show business. And so there's Disney is one place that I do that. SeaWorld is another, as well as there's a few organizations around town, one being Central Florida Community Arts, where we have the largest choir in the country, and potentially the world, and largest community choir. And so I do some work with them, and yeah, so that's what brought me down to Orlando.
So a couple of things. When you say that you grew up with watching your parents up on stage, happen to be a PK, pastor's kid?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just
How'd you know?
Well, a couple of things that we could talk about later. But my wife is a PK, and she's also really active in community theater. She produces. She's been acting, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But also just there's so many people that I know that catch this bug, whether it's teaching or entertaining, they get it from a church context.
Yeah.
And later on, I want to explore. Although there's a lot of kids, it sounds like you were pretty fortunate in having a mom that really got it. Yes. But a lot of creatives have a hard time at church.
Yeah. I know there was a verse, not to get overly spiritual and biblical, but there was a verse that my mother used in raising my sister and I, and it's this idea of bring up the child in the way that they should go. And oftentimes that is misinterpreted to be bring up the child in the way that you think they should go, when really she was saying, no, bring up the child in the way that they should go. And she encouraged us to pursue the things that we wanted to do, pursue our passions and figure those things out. And she was saying, okay, how can I support my children and bringing them up in the way that they should go. And thusly, my sister is a very successful writer now, because she was brought up in the way that she should go to become a writer. And I am living my best life as a performer day in and day out because she allowed me to be brought up in the way that I should go.
Yeah, and you, I mean, you kind of hit on this, but I think what you're talking about in that proximity principle is you've got to, if you want to make it big, you got to make it small.
Yes.
And I know, you know, some would call it the gig economy. Some it would be just you followed opportunity and you brought your passion with you
Yeah.
in all that. So
Yes. Well,
now,
and like I said, there's, I get here and there's a whole bunch of people who have that same drive. And so, in order to make it, you gotta just keep at it just a little bit longer than everybody else.
yeah, you found your tribe.
That's right.
Yeah. So tell me that when we met, you were speaking up on the stage, and you were introduced as a Disney actor and entertainer, but you spoke on leadership themes.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did you gain as a performer, somebody coming out of theater and acting? How did you gain your insights around leadership?
So again, going back into my into my history a little bit, uh, I read a lot now, but I didn't read very much before. I didn't like reading, and what I've discovered is I didn't like reading because of required reading. And it was my teacher saying, "This is an amazing American novel, and we have all decided that this is the best of the best when it comes to writing, and you will have a great time reading this." And I would open it, and I would get a little bit, and I think partially it was my attention span at the time, that I was expected to read 30 or 40 or 50 pages in a night, and I just couldn't do that with my attention span. The other thing is that they would take, 3 or 4 pages to describe a tree. And I was like, I get it. There's a big giant tree outside of your house. I really get it. Let's move on. And so I just couldn't get on board with that style of writing. When I was, it was about a little over, it would have been about 12 years now, 12 or 13 years ago now, a friend of mine handed me a book, and he said, I'd like for you to read this in preparation for some work that I'm going to have you do. And so I read it, and I flew through this book, and that had never happened to me. And what I realized was, oh my goodness, people are writing about things that I care about. And what I discovered was, the idea, jumping ahead, the idea of leadership, that was the area that first caught my attention in my reading, and it wasn't self-help. I want to be really clear about it wasn't self-help in regard to inspiration and you can do it kind of reading. It was, no, here are the nuts and bolts of how to be a great leader wherever you are. And everybody, if in fact, as John Maxwell says, leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. So leadership being influence, everybody has influence somewhere. And so if you want to have more influence somewhere, then you have to learn how to be a better leader. And so that drew me into this idea that, okay, I do have influence in my realm of creativity, my realm of performing on stage. I'll often say, there's a reason that it's called the lead, and it's not because you have the most lines. You are on stage and you are the lead because you are taking the cast through this show. You are deciding the pacing of the show, the beats of the show, all of that, the play, the musical, whatever it is. You're taking everybody and the audience through all of that. And so you're leading everybody through that. So it's important then, not only does your character need to have some credibility, but you as the actor have to have credibility with your cast. Your cast needs to trust you that you're going to lead them well through the scene, through the show. And so all of that comes into play. So the principles of leadership apply far beyond the realm of the business books that they've been written for. The principles of leadership carry over into every aspect where anybody has influence.
So I'm writing down this because you just shifted a perspective for me. Lead as in lead actor. I've really stopped talking about leadership development. I've been doing it for about 20 years because exactly as you say, all those skills that you talk about, normally you don't get until you become part of management.
Yes.
And that's when that discussion starts, because as much as we say everybody's a leader,
yeah,
nobody knows that until you go to a leadership course.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people who avoid that at all costs because they don't want to be part of management. They don't want to become the man. And
Yes.
so they don't look at leadership stuff. And the shift that you just gave for me is that lead not as in a people manager, but lead as in lead actor. And it goes
Mm.
to, here's a different definition of leadership for you from Daniel Goleman. He says the primary role of leaders is to focus attention on the right things,
Mm.
which goes directly towards like what you said about a lead actor may not have the most lines, but they're the ones who focus the audience's attention on the
Yes.
right things around the storyline.
Yes. We talked. So I do a certain amount of directing around town, and one of the things that a definition of director is, that your job is to eliminate distraction. From the audience perspective, if there's anything that is distracting on stage, you got to take that away and focus the attention on the story, focus the attention on the emotional beats that are happening, so the audience is clear of everything else and they can focus on what they need to.
And it actually gets into so there's a lot of I talk about performance rather than results, although results are important
Yeah.
because there's so many other factors when it comes to results that you don't
Mm-hmm.
have control over.
Yeah.
And especially like as a director, you want to get rid of all of the distractions you have control over. However, you got to be good enough to focus attention even where there are uncontrolled distractions.
Yes.
And that's the bigger challenge. I know that there's probably lots of challenges being a Dapper Dan, or you're walking through a theme park where you never know when a child might explosively vomit during your performance.
And all of these, you name it, it's happened.
Right. And I joke about it. So I've been doing a lot. I've been speaking for 25 years. It's just that it's always been in other contexts. I've never had to worry about having a speaker page or anything like that. But I realized that, man, so I've done outdoor programs, adventure programs, things like that. And I've done executive programs, speak, a couple thousand people to 5 executives. But there's all these unique challenges, like speaking in the outdoors and having a bear walk through your crowd. Keeping
Yes.
attention at that point is a big challenge.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. But that idea of as a lead actor, and I'm talking about everybody needs these skills.
Yeah.
And to me, a distraction is when I talk about leadership development, you get a big portion of people that are tuned out.
Yeah.
So the idea of talking about, even as saying, hey, it's not about leading people, it's about being a lead actor and focusing attention. That might be another way to get a different group of participants interested in these topics that are so important.
I believe that well, so my theme that I have come around for myself is and kind of my mission in life that I've landed on is living at that intersection of leadership and creativity, so yeah, because I've learned leadership and creativity, that intersection is where great things are going to happen. That you can have all the ideas in the world, but if you don't have the influence to get them done, then who cares? And you can have great influence, but nothing new to say. So again, who cares? We're not moving forward. And so it is that intersection of leadership and creativity. So when you talk about the importance of these principles and how they carry over into any other realm, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You can be leading a sewing club. I don't care. There is something to that, that when it comes to leadership and creativity, that you are moving forward with your sewing club and you have the potential to change lives with that club, and save lives potentially, and I don't mean to, I don't mean to overstate it, but yeah, I am incredibly passionate about these principles, and making sure that everybody understands, no, we're not just putting on a show tonight. The show that we are doing, it really has the potential to change lives. It has the potential to save someone's life. And we know that. I know that, and I want you to know that. And so let's all go out there and do that with the intention of, we're not just putting on a show for the fun of it. We actually have the potential of changing a life tonight.
Yeah, and even if it's one of the lives of the cast.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So your terminology of great things happen at the intersection of leadership and creativity.
Yeah.
I do a workshop I've actually got a webinar coming up in 2 weeks, and I do workshops and building the habits of what I call practical creativity.
Okay.
And so instead of terming it as leadership and creativity, I say you've got to build habits around creativity, but you've also got to be able to land a plane. Those are those practical habits of execution.
So I want to hear more on that, but I not to I just released literally this morning a podcast about keystone habits in regard to creativity. So I'm excited to hear more what you have to say about that.
Yeah. Make sure you send me that info and I'll link it into it.
Yeah.
You know, I put things in the show notes, but I don't know that people look at show notes. So if you're watching this, comment
Go to the show
on it,
notes. Yeah.
Comment on this, whether or not you even look at show notes or not. So
I'll tell you, it is funny. We're going to put that in the show notes. I'm going to make sure I put that in the show notes. I've never been to the show notes. I might glance at them, but I don't go there with the intention of doing anything about it. So I agree.
Yeah,
it's funny.
Yeah. And so I try and honor, whenever I say that, I try and honor it.
Yeah.
But then
I'll send you a link.
as I'm putting in the show notes, whether it's YouTube or podcasts and stuff like that, I'm going, do people really like this? But it's more about me, just like this whole interview thing is more about me learning how to interview people. And if people watch it and are moved by it, wonderful.
Great.
But it starts with something about what I need to do for me. And I'm hopefully that I'm being present and kind as I do great things for other people. So,
sure. Yeah.
But tell me, like, for me, this whole idea of, first of all, from leadership development, I've been doing that for 20 some years. It all goes back, all the research goes back to, it's not about willpower.
Mm-hmm.
It's about creating the right habits. The right behaviors will change your effectiveness and efficiency. And it's not about willpower of, I'm going to change this habit. Habits are not changed, they're replaced.
Yeah.
So when you figure out those things that aren't getting you to where you want to go, those are the habits that you seek to create new triggers and new behaviors based on those things.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, and I'm making an assumption here, correct me if I'm wrong, but you deal with a lot of the creative people who have strong creative habits, but they don't have what you would call leadership. I would call practical habits of, I've got a gazillion things that I want to do, but I can't land any of them.
Right.
I work on the other side where when you ask a room of 100 people, how many of you think that you're creative? And maybe in a good room, you get a third of the hands. And so they all are experts at implementation, but they're implementing crap and they don't know how to get to a different spot around it.
Yeah.
So either as an individual or as an organization, can you develop the habits of creativity? Yeah. And there's individual skills around creativity you can develop, but also there's culture and systems you can develop in an organization around it. Yeah. Same thing with execution or practicality. As an individual, there's habits that you can develop to become more pragmatic and practical. Same thing with an organization with those systems.
Yeah.
So I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but there's other things I want to go dive into from your presentation. So
sure.
I mean, what are your thoughts about?
Yeah, well, and one of the things that I landed on, so I heard Johnny Cash, he was being interviewed years ago, obviously, and I heard him say, I'm not the kind of guy who can sit down and just write a song. However, if I go for a walk in the woods in the morning, chances are really good I will have written a song by the evening. And so that, and when I heard him say that, I was driving and literally let out a yes, just while, it just came up out of me. Yes, I get that, because I'm not somebody who is creative on cue. I can be creative on schedule. I'm not somebody who is very often creative on cue. So it's much better if you come to me and say, Rob, can you think about this for a little while and get back to me in a couple of days? Given the right cocktail of caffeine, I can be creative quickly, but at the same time, like, so many stars need to align for me to be creative immediately.
Yeah, there's a saying that says inspiration is for amateurs.
Yes.
And it's not saying anything bad about inspiration. It's just saying if you are going to be a professional creator,
right,
you can't wait for inspiration to hit. You've got to create mechanisms in your life to allow you to get to that creative space on a regular basis.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's great. Inspiration for amateurs means just that if you don't have to feed yourself with your creativity, great. Wait for the inspiration.
Right.
But if you've got to get kibble for your dogs,
right, Exactly. So yeah, that was where I that idea of him going, I know that I need to write a song, so I'm not going to sit down and write a song. Instead, I'm going to go for a walk in the woods. And so, what are the habits that we are creating? Uh, I quote Aaron Sorkin, one of my all-time favorite screenwriters and playwrights. Um, he for a season he was writing for Sports Night, the dramedy on ABC in the late '90s, as well as West Wing. There was a season where they overlapped, and so he had a time when he was writing he was responsible for writing a half-hour comedy every week and an hour-long drama every single week, and they were waiting for those scripts, and he required a shower. um, and it was because, and he would take 7 or 8 showers in a day sometimes. And, people looking in would think, well, he must be obsessive compulsive about cleanliness, when really it was just, no, I'm stuck on, I need a new idea, or I need a solution to this problem. And so he would take a shower and he would come out with the idea or the solution. So for me, it was the idea of what habits am I putting in place that allow me to be in that creative state, and schedule time to be in that creative state, so that when I need to have that creative idea, I've already had, either I have time coming up that I'm in a creative state to come up with a new idea or a solution, or I have recently, if somebody says, hey, Rob, do you have a show idea? Well, I had one a couple months ago, and I wrote it down, and I'm ready with that show idea. So because I took that time I'll go for a run or something. That's typically when I come up with my ideas. But it's folding laundry, and it's taking showers, it's just driving. When your mind can shut off, and allow itself to unlock and go into that creative space, that's what you need to schedule when it comes to creative habits.
Yeah, and okay, so there's lots of brain science behind why that works.
Yeah.
But what I find people doing is they go, "Oh, you mean Aaron Sorkin took showers? Okay, I'm going to take showers."
I'm going to take a shower.
or
Right.
Rob does it while he's running, or you know what, Jobs just wore the same thing every day.
Yeah.
And what people try and do is treat that as a recipe and make the equation of, if they do that, it'll work for me.
Right.
And it's so frustrating because you see so much of that. One of my kind of, and I'm exploring this right now, but a lot of influencers and coaches and consultants bank on that. That they're going to give you the recipe for success, and you're going to uncritically try to implement that.
Right.
And then you just become you become addicted to those recipes. And
Right.
really it starts with some self-reflection and self-awareness of, oh, I've got to create space.
Yeah.
How I create space is going to be different for everybody.
Mm.
The idea that stepping out of the things that are distracting you. That's all those things that you talked about are mechanisms to get your attention back.
Yeah.
And so if you can find ways to, whatever works for you, I was telling you earlier about my office annexes out at the Point
Yes.
Magoo or whatever. I've worked out of, I spent a decade inside big corporate learning and all that kind of stuff. But before and afterwards, independent, working out of the world headquarters here of Into Wisdom Publishing and Into Wisdom Group it's my tough shed I built out in the backyard. But I need to get out there and create space.
Yeah.
So before I've written a couple of books, and they all got started in a space like that. One was a coffee shop in Costa Mesa. Another one was having a annual pass at Disneyland. I would start my day at New Orleans Square with a mint julep, and believe it or not, a Palm Pilot with a fold-out keyboard was the first draft of my second book.
I love that.
On a similar topic, but you said something that really intrigued me when I was listening to you speak, and you said, I'll let you riff on this a little bit.
Okay.
What does it mean to assume top shelf?
So
I'm assuming that's not liquor. So
no. Although whatever it is that you put on your top shelf, yeah, that's what that is. So I often think in my head and refer to top shelf leadership and top shelf creativity, and that and then building a bridge between the two. So if you think of two shelves next to each other, but there's a little bit of a distance between, and you need to build a bridge from one to the other. And so you have, if you were to talk about all of the great things that the great attributes of leadership and the great attributes of creativity, that oftentimes the great attributes of leadership and great attributes of creativity, we're going to put those on the top shelves, right? Unfortunately, you have the top shelf, but you also have the bottom shelf and everything in between. So the not so great attributes of leadership and creativity go onto the bottom shelf. And instead of building a bridge from one top of the shelf to the other top of the shelf, oftentimes leaders will build a bridge from the top of the shelf down to the bottom of the creativity shelf. And when I'm referring to those attributes, I'm talking about people. I'm talking about the attributes of those people. Whether you consider yourself a leader or you consider yourself a creative, creatives can often look over at leadership and go, I don't want to be under the restraints of leadership. No, I don't need somebody telling me how to do it. And I don't need, and they they're hitting me with these deadlines, and I just hate deadlines. I don't need deadlines. I'm a creative. I need free space to move about. And so the creative is drawing a bridge from their top shelf. Don't they realize how amazing and creative I am? Don't give me confines for my creativity. And they're drawing a bridge from their top shelf down to the bottom shelf of leadership. Meanwhile, the leaders they're living in their top shelf, and they're going, oh my goodness, look at I have these creatives over here, and they're never on schedule. They're always coming up with these ideas that we don't have the money for. Who's going to pay for that? And they draw a bridge from their top shelf down to the bottom shelf of creativity. And so what if instead we were to recognize, yes, there is a bottom shelf. We all have frustrations with each other sometimes. And at the same time, what if we instead built trust with each other to only travel back and forth between the top shelf? That the creative goes, oh my goodness, thank you so much for this deadline. It will keep me on track. Thank you so much. And if the leader goes, I am amazed with this out of the box thinking, I don't know how we're going to do it, but you know what? Let's talk some more about it. And what if instead they lived on the top shelf, and you were drawing that bridge back and forth between the top shelf of leadership and creativity instead of just a slide immediately down to the bottom shelf of the other?
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes here, and kind of circled is a quote from Covey. I think this just came to mind. I don't think you said it, but the idea that we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their behavior.
Mm,
And so we look
yes.
out there, and we know what we are intending to do, but
Right.
we look out and we catch all the bottom shelf behaviors of the others.
Yeah.
And that's how we judge it. So imagine I'm doing another series of interviews with people who are trying to heal our national divide.
Yes.
And this concept of assume top shelf.
Yeah.
A friend of mine named Alan Hilton, who's running a church-based program called House United.
Okay.
And the whole idea is you get all sides, and especially the polarization of left and right, progressive, conservative, all in the same room,
Mm-hmm.
and help them realize that, you know what, they have something that I need, and I have something that they need.
Yes.
And together, to Jerry Maguire it, they complete each other.
You complete me. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting that the connection of assuming top shelf can have in a much broader context,
Mm-hmm.
not just with productivity, organization, or personal productivity, but if you can assume top shelf of somebody you really disagree with,
Yes.
that has
Yeah.
immense power.
Yeah, assume positive intent
Yep.
is often the phrase that's put out there. And we just recently, there's a show that I work on. I won't say which one. There's a show that I work on that
You
has
can if you
gone
want.
through.
I mean,
Well, it's gone through some rewrites. And it's because there's, for those who have been paying attention and know where I work and what I do, you'll know what show I'm talking about. But the show has been running for decades and decades. And so jokes that were funny in the late 70s, early 80s are no longer appropriate, surprisingly enough. And so and the show tends to, about every 10 years, they take another look at the show and make sure that everything is okay. The show's been running for decades, and So now it's a matter of them looking at it and going, okay, in our current state, and in our current environment, what needs to go and what do we need to change from the way that we've been doing the show? And our director showed up, and it was really good, because we love our show and we love it the way that it is, and we don't want somebody coming in and saying, sorry guys, this thing that you love, we're going to have to cut it. um, that was a hard day when that happened, but we were able to talk about the fact that, hey, listen, do we want this show to run for another bunch of decades? Then we're going to need to make some changes to it. And if we don't make these changes, then you might be able to keep the show up and running for another year or so, but I wouldn't be surprised if it finds itself on the list of shows to be cut, because we're not making changes and keeping up with times. So we were able to, again, you talk about intentions versus behaviors, and the behavior that our director showed was in direct reflection positively of the intention that they had of going, guys, I want to keep our show open for another bunch of years. Let's keep it open, and we're going to make these changes, and that's going to be hard. But at the same time, let's go ahead and make the changes because it'll help us in the long term. And we were able to join him there with that positive intent of going, okay, we know why we're making these changes. And so he's not coming down from on high saying, I don't like the show anymore, I'm making changes. But instead, we were all able to meet together with a positive intent to help our show stay open longer.
Yeah. And that can come across as being like reactive.
Yes.
And you're out there and we don't want this show to die, so we're going to avoid all these things. Or you can say, we want our show to survive, so what can we focus on to make it relevant?
Yes.
And instead of just cutting the stuff that might be offensive, you're starting to look at how can we have an impact.
Right.
Continue to have impact and engage an audience in, like what you say, on the surface, it looks like it's just a fun, silly show.
Yep.
But ultimately, what you're doing is you're servicing that crowd and that audience and the actors in a way that keeps them present. Yes. Whether it's for entertainment purposes, or maybe they walk away going, wow, I never thought about that line before, or whatever.
Right. And it was funny. I mean, there were some jokes where, oh, yeah, I guess that would be upsetting to some people. Okay, yeah, let's change that.
Let's avoid that. Let's try not to piss people off.
Yeah, exactly.
So so much more. And Rob, I'm learning that we're going to have have another conversation because there's so much here. I'm writing down a ton of stuff, but I want to get into having worked. I mean, you're all about story. Yeah. And you're all about, whether you work for Disney, you hear it all the time, but in the theater, it's all about the story. It's all about getting that narrative across. And the same thing goes with being effective professionally, leadership wise. Story is a powerful, powerful tool. Yeah. Why is it so powerful? And what's the mechanism? How does story work to bring about these moments?
I think, there's a lot that has been said and written about the importance of story. And if you start with a story, open with a story, is always the thought. And what I think people need to open their minds to is that actually the story might begin long before you say once upon a time. And we talk a lot in the parks in regard to the show has begun in the parking lot. The show starts as soon as they book their tickets. And they receive a package in the mail saying, here are your magic bands and here are all of the amazing things that you're going to do. Make sure you download this app so that you can start making plans for your time that's going to be there. The story begins there. In the theater, we talk about the story might start when they buy their tickets, and the story begins in the parking lot as they park their car and they come in and they have their lobby experience, all of that before they even sit down and the curtain rises. We have begun our story. And so I think when it comes to story for me, stories take a little bit longer. It takes a little bit longer to tell a story than to just make your point. I can come out with a really good quip, a really good point, and say, who knows, any kind of point that I want to make. I can come out with just that one little phrase, but if I lead up to it with a story and say, here's how I landed on this, it's going to be far more impactful. It's just gonna come together a whole lot easier.
Yeah, in the world of brain science, they talk about how data and logic convince, but story moves people to action.
Yes.
And it goes into, I'll geek out just a second on the visual stuff, but story is a visual medium, even though it's oral, even though if you're telling a story, what you're doing is painting a powerful word picture in your brain.
Yes.
And your brain, 2/3, about 66% of your neurons of your brain is dedicated to visual processing.
Yeah.
So if you can figure out a way to tap into the visual and it
You
really
can give somebody a picture. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
You have direct access to their emotions, and emotions move people. That's what emotions mean.
Well, and also I think Don Miller talks about finishing the story loop. And I don't know if that's his concept or if he just talks a lot about it, but finishing the story loop, where when you start a story, your audience goes, okay, I need for you to finish it. And so because you've begun an intriguing story that has compelling characters and a storyline and a plot that matters, then the audience is leaning forward going, okay, how does this end? And so if you want that story, if you're using a story to make your point, they're going to stick with you a whole lot longer than if you just said, here's the point I'm trying to make, A, B, C, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, and we're done. But instead get into it with the story and then keep referring back to the story. I think that's hugely helpful.
So you're a camp guy, and obviously I learned about storytelling sitting around a campfire.
Right.
And it was always that story arc and the story for entertainment. Several years ago, when I was putting together a program for communication for leadership, I ran into works of a guy named Stephen Denning, who talks about storytelling for leaders.
Yeah.
And what really hit me is so true in other places. Start with the end in mind. Figure out what do you want this story to do, to accomplish, and then choose the style and content of the story for what you're trying to move people to.
Yeah.
And it changed my mind, because all of a sudden I can tell a story in a sentence and it still moves people. Like, I think about attributed to Hemingway when he was challenged to do a 6-word story.
Yes.
You've heard that one.
I do, but for your listeners who don't, go ahead.
I'm trying to remember it perfectly, but it's baby shoes for sale, never used.
Yeah.
Oh, and as I have a 5-year-old, so I still think in terms of those. And man, that gets you.
Yeah.
And that gets into the mechanism of story, which you said so well. It's like, I can make a point, but if it doesn't change people's behavior, what's the point?
And they will walk away going, what was the point?
Well, the other side is they remember your story and not your point.
Yes. Yeah. That's, I think that happens a lot. And if you got to be able to draw it back.
Yeah. And I've just experienced so many speakers that are incredibly entertaining. And you ask, what was that about? Oh, they told a story about the lions, and they're going, okay, so what was the point? It was fun. I laughed.
Yeah. Well, good. That sounds like a fun evening of stand-up comedy.
Yeah. And if that was the intent, perfect. You knocked it out of the park. I don't know that when they go to your Disney shows that they're looking for like process management clues.
Exactly.
What they're looking for is exactly what you guys designed the show to deliver.
Yeah, we every show has for any Disney geek that's watching, every show has a creative intent, a creative success line.
What does success look like?
Exactly. And so one of the shows that I work on, the Hoop-Dee-Doo Review, our creative intent is we are not the best show at Walt Disney World, but we're the most fun you ever had. And so we don't set out to be the best show at Walt Disney World. We have a whole bunch of things that go wrong pretty much every single show by design. And we include the audience, and people will come back and they'll say, oh, best show we've ever seen. What they don't realize is actually that was the most fun you ever had. That wasn't the best show you've ever seen. That was the most fun you've ever had. We're going to let Festival of the Lion King, Finding Nemo, Fantasmic, we're going to let those be the best shows that you've ever seen. We are going to be the most fun you ever had. And then meanwhile, you have shows like the Dapper Dans, where they, the intent of the Dapper Dans is not, you should never walk away from a Dapper Dan show going, oh my goodness, those harmonies were so clean. Oh my goodness, did you hear that tap dancing? So good. You should always walk away going, man, those guys sure did look like they were having a good time and love each other.
Yeah. And I think in particular, and I'm not behind the scenes there, but for things like the Dapper Dan and street theater, it's all about creating the entire experience, the
Yes.
entire story of walking into one of the parks.
Yeah.
Is those things are driven to create that total experience. You go back to the five sensing philosophy of the Imagineers,
Yeah.
and what should people be hearing on Main Street USA other than Barbershop Quartet?
Right.
Yeah.
What yeah. And let's plan that and let's solidify it that what we will produce the entire thing to make sure that it is exactly what you expect to be experiencing when you walk down Main Street USA.
So I've written a couple of books on the intentional use of experience, and that's what people will think they're creating an experience when really they're thinking in terms of a unidimensional experience of, I'm going to sit in a room and listen to somebody speak.
Right.
Or I'm going to go out on a challenge course, ropes course, and swing around in the trees for a little bit. Yeah. And yes, that engages more senses. But as a program designer, as a facilitator, as a leader, I want to think in terms of the entire experience of how you step in as a whole person, and how you step out as a whole person.
Let me get your thoughts on this, because there was a conference. I won't say which one. There was a conference I went to years ago, and I actually stopped going. I went for a long time to this conference, and they did an excellent job of creating memorable experiences between the meaningful content. And so all of it worked together to where they would do these. It was a stadium type setting, arena type setting, and they would literally shoot people out of cannons. And in between the speakers and the content that were there to help really change people's leadership. And they came under new leadership, and that new leadership decided, well, but what is the meaningful nature of shooting somebody out of a cannon? Well, what it was from my perspective was you were creating an experience that made sure, like it was just truly like, let's make sure that people get back from the break on time because they don't want to miss what we're about to do. And we want to make sure that we're keeping the people's intentions with these experiences, these memorable experiences, so that when it's time for the meaningful, we can shift gears a little bit, but we have their attention. And so they actually stopped doing all of the memorable and only did the meaningful. Thus, none of it became memorable anymore. And that was the point at which I went, this might not be for me anymore. And I stepped away from going to that conference. So for you, I'm just curious. Let me get some free consultation from you. How do you balance that memorable with the meaningful?
It's a great question, and I think it's so it goes back to the camp stuff.
Yeah.
To me, it also goes back to the director stuff. If you're about eliminating distractions and focusing attention, you go back to those memory making things, and you say, is it focusing attention on the right thing?
Yeah.
Is there, and you can rationalize anything as working or anything as not working. So you really have to be honest with yourself and ask, at camp, ever play Capture the Flag?
Oh yeah.
Okay. The game that nobody wins, everybody loses, and usually somebody gets hurt. So we do this big talk with all the kids, talking about the importance of being nice to each other, and just kind of real broad, being kind type of thing. Then we go play Capture the Flag. And we have two different camps. They're called villages. Okay. And we're walking back from a game of Capture the Flag, and one of the kids looks at me and says, I was known as Bear, says, Bear, are all the bad kids in the other village? Because they cheat. and what we realized is that a lot of the times we would be very recreation and our intention for the camp would often work against each other.
Okay.
And so we had to go, all right, we want to be intentional about every moment of camp. Well, that's exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as I started to design these things, it's how can I be intentional about as much as I can and make sure everything else is neutral,
Yeah.
that it isn't
Mm,
distracting.
yeah.
And so in something like that, I don't know what their intentions are, but to me, it's a limited vision of how you deliver meaningful content. Because if
Yeah.
you think the only way that you can deliver meaningful content is from behind a podium, man, you've just limited your options.
Right.
And if you think that the only distractions come from things off the podium, man, you're deluded.
Mm.
And so that'd be my question was you go through and you say, well, why are we shooting people out of cannons?
Yeah.
And I think it's justifiable if we want to get somebody in their seat so they can experience really quality content. That's valid.
Yeah. Don't be late
Um,
for the next session. We're going to shoot a guy out of a cannon.
right.
Okay. Now that you're here, when
Right.
we
And it
did
got to
that.
be. I think there's but there's also ways to say choose the session that you shoot somebody out of the cannon from.
Yeah.
Turn that into an object lesson or an
Yes.
illustration for the meaning that you're trying to transfer.
Right.
Otherwise, it's a bait and switch, and
Right.
people would leave because you're going,
Oh,
okay,
absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, the cannon happened and now I'm out.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I saw it. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
right. And now I'm stuck here, and now I'm resentful.
Right. Right.
So changing gears a little bit, and
Okay.
I'm curious because you've, like what you said in your little personal history there, you've known that you've wanted to be an actor and singer and a performer all your life.
Yeah.
Um, now, what's it like? Because Disney is from the outside is the Magic Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
From the inside, I know I have Disney friends. They call it the Tragic Kingdom. And there's challenges of being creative within a large organization.
Yeah.
And I want to start there. What do you think? Why is it challenging when you get into management and administration? Why is it challenging for creatives to step into that?
I do think that there's a special brand of creative that is able to do what I refer to as theme park work, and it's yeah, I have a number of friends who they did their time on Broadway, and they would come to Orlando just looking for a 9 to 5 where they can utilize their skill, but still be home for dinner in the evening. And but the specialty skill when it comes to the creatives of theme park entertainment and theme parks in general is the ability to be able to do it over and over and over and over and over again with the same freshness that you did it the first time, that you did it the 100th time, that you did it the 1,000th time. And literally did the math a couple years ago, and that was a couple years ago, and I've done over 16,000, 17,000 performances of various different shows. And so it's the ability to present a show with the freshness that you had the first time. And I think that is where sometimes we get into trouble, as far as people coming in, young creatives coming in and saying, I'm creative. I'm going to change things up when I start doing these shows. And what they don't know is the expectation of our guests, the expectation of the creative teams, the leadership that is in place, is that no, they're coming to see the same show that they saw last time. They are chasing that excitement that they had the first time seeing it. Now, there are elements that we build into the live shows that allow themselves to be presented brand new in the moment, whether it's audience participation or pulling up volunteers or anything like that. That allows for, obviously, this show is happening in the moment right now at this one place, but um, it also there's a whole bunch of elements that happen over and over and over again. So the difficulty of theme park entertainment is doing it over and over and over again and presenting it with the same freshness. That's the magic trick of it. And so I think for a lot of people, when those that refer to it as the Tragic Kingdom, it's that you're stuck. If you aren't built for that, if you aren't built to do a show, excuse me, over and over and over again, then it's gonna be a tough gig. Excuse me, one second,
Yeah.
because I have another thought on
It's
that.
it's not about you, it's about the mouse.
Yes. Well, and the mouse would say that it's not
About the
about
guest.
me, it's about the guest. Yeah. So, and if you are able to key into that every single night, I step on stage and I do the show. I'll specifically refer to the Hoop-Dee-Doo Review, a dinner show at Fort Wilderness. Every single night I step onto there, and typically every night in at least one of the shows, I will look into the first couple of rows and I will see somebody who is clearly not only experiencing our show for the first time, but experiencing live theater for the first time. And their eyes are big, and I can tell from their expression, they're thinking, I've heard that this is possible. I've heard that this happens, but I've never seen it in real life. I've only seen it in movies. I've only seen it on television. I've only watched from the confines of a movie theater or my living room. And here I am in the room where it's actually happening right in front of me. There's live theater happening, and the look on their face. Well, how easy is it then for me to go, all right, this show is for you, sir. This show is for you, madam. We are going to show you something you've never seen before. And I know what's coming, but you don't. And just you wait until you see what's coming around in the next hour and a half of this show. And now it's really easy to do the show for that somebody.
Does that translate into outside theme park stuff? Having somebody who is an artist or a creative bent stepping into an organization that it's not a creative organization per se. It's not about television performance theaters, but it's just a creative person stepping into an organization. Do you think it's that fear of constraint that makes it a challenge to step in?
Yeah, it goes back to what I was talking about before of, when we were referring to the top shelf, when it comes to creatives living in their top shelf world, they don't want the confines of corporate world. They don't want deadlines. They think they don't want deadlines. Right. They think they don't want that, they don't want to be confined to the box of whatever corporation that they're in. When the reality is that actually, you and I both know that the confines are super helpful, actually, and deadlines are incredibly helpful when it comes to creativity. But yeah, I think they are building a slide from the top shelf down to their bottom shelf of leadership and going, well, I don't want to work in corporate world. I'm a creative. Well, okay, but at the same time, corporate needs creative, and if you're great at that, what if you were able to bring in your top shelf creative and assume the top shelf of leadership and both of you are changed by each other? Wouldn't that be a better world?
Have you heard the story behind the Cologne concert by Keith Jarrett? Jazz pianist in Germany.
Yes. I have.
The crappy piano.
Yes.
And it's such a wonderful story about.
You need to link in the show notes. Nobody's going to look at it, but you need to link in the show notes to that TED Talk.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole bunch of. I think in 1 week I heard a couple of podcasts and a TED Talk on this idea of the power of constraints.
Yes.
For the creative process, innovation, in fact, requires those constraints in order for it to make a difference. Yeah. And you hit something there, which is they need to move each other. And this gets into a question about more specifically, having grown up a pastor's kid. It sounds like you had your church was pretty open to the creative process.
Absolutely.
Do you ever run into people, especially I've run into artists and creatives who have left the church because they've never found a home there? Is that something that, am I just running into the wrong crowd or?
No, I think, a couple of things. There's a gentleman that his name is Jeff Surratt, and he is just a really, really smart consultant, but he consults mainly with churches. And one of his main themes that when he comes and chats with churches and helping them do what they do better, the main themes is going, you got to make sure, all right, who are you trying to reach? And you got to make sure Sunday morning might not be the best time to reach the group of people that your particular church is trying to reach. And so I remember, I helped start a church up in Jacksonville, Florida, and the lead pastor there, he was saying, we got to get to Sunday morning, got to get to Sunday morning, got to get to Sunday morning. In that we were doing kind of these one-off meetings as we were in the process of launching, and meeting on Saturday nights and Sunday nights, and, saying, hey, here's another way of doing church. He's like, we got to get to Sunday morning. And I pushed back a little bit on that, going, do we have to get to Sunday morning? So I say all of that to say, I think that churches can get stuck in the in the tradition of church, and creatives especially aren't real interested in tradition. And so, yeah, creatives have a hard time sometimes finding a place for that. The other thing is, and sadly, and I don't say this, the church that I grew up in, a shout out to the chapel in Akron, Ohio. Uh, the church that I grew up in, absolutely. You said that they valued the arts, they valued creativity. Oh my goodness, through the roof, they valued creativity and they valued the arts. And I had a whole bunch of experience and was able to arrive in Orlando as a 19-year-old kid with some things on my resume that mattered because of that church. And so I say that to say that they valued the arts, they valued creativity, and a lot of churches don't. And so if you value excellence in the arts, if you value excellence and creativity, then sadly, and I hate this, but sadly, a lot of churches don't value that. And they value other things. So maybe that's not necessarily their individual mission. They value other things, all pointing to one main theme, I would hope.
Yeah.
But at the same time, at the end of the day, they don't value that. So a lot of times creatives, they go to a church and they go, oh, this is, remember the distractions we were talking about earlier? This is very distracting. The music is bad. The visuals are bad. The balance is bad. The production, the presentation, all of it is bad. And I wish I could flip a switch and turn that off and not care about those things.
Yeah.
But I care about those things because they matter to me. They're distraction to me. So they aren't able to find a home anywhere at churches, oftentimes at a local church, because those distractions are there. So they find a place online, or they find a place someplace else. The other thing is that, I have found church in community outside of the brick and mortar walls of a church. And there's a group of guys that I get together regularly, and we have church together, and that's what that is. Anyway, sorry, you got me going on a thing.
No, that's exactly what I wanted to hear for your perspective on. I just had a conversation this week. I don't know if you've ever heard, author named Brennan Manning took a concept called pioneer theology, somebody else's concept, and he talks about the difference between pioneer and settler theology.
Okay.
And the pioneers are out there blazing the trail. They would be considered more like your creatives, they're edgier people and stuff like that. And the settlers are comfortable in town.
Yes.
And they're happy with where they're at and all that kind of stuff. And this guy that I was talking with, and we were exploring some different things, that came up, and he's so frustrated that he wants to be trailblazing. He is a pioneer. He wants to explore. He wants to, and he knows what goes along with that you're going along a lot of rabbit trails, you hit cliffs and things like that. And he sees it as the pioneer. He has settlers in his church that will never, ever change.
Yeah.
And the pioneers in their church are frustrated. He's one of them that want to move forward, want to make those changes. And we got to talking about, well, what if the pioneers rush out, come back and tell the settlers how wonderful it is out there. And the settlers, hey, yeah, that's great. I'm excited for you, but don't make me change. And so they run out there, and everybody's happy with each other, but neither one is willing to do the top shelf thinking around it.
Yeah.
What if the perspective isn't, the settlement isn't staying where it's at? When you come back to town as a pioneer, they come to the edge of town and meet you there.
Yeah.
You leave again, and now all of a sudden the center of town's a little bit more towards the edge. So the benefit becomes, that settlement is moving slowly.
Yeah.
But as the pioneer, they're mitigating your risk of falling off the cliff or going down rabbit trails because you're continuing coming back and visiting. So they both need each other desperately. One for the sense of direction and safety, the other for the sense of progress and movement.
I love that visual of them running to the edge of town to meet the pioneer and hear what's going on in the big city. Bring it back and tell us what's going on. I heard a story of a music director at a church that he just wanted to move the piano from one side of the stage to the other, and but he knew this church community is so steeped in the tradition. There's going to be committee meeting after committee meeting to decide, well, who's going to move it and how far do you have to move it? And we need to see plans, and we need to vote on it. There need to be a church vote on moving the piano from one side of the stage to the other. And it was going to take months, and it was going to cause division in the church. And he just knew this is a bad idea, but he also knew it's going to be better in the long run if the church, if the piano is on the other side of the stage. And so it took him 3 years, but he moved it 1 inch every week. and and he knew and for a while the piano inexplicably was right there in the middle of the platform, and nobody knew why, but it had just found its way there slowly over time. And it sounds, it was a roundabout way of him running back. The audio, the congregation didn't know that they were being moved to the edge of town as they were being moved.
And I think it's true in the church, but that same image works in organizations.
Yeah.
And it gives hope to the creatives, because all of a sudden they can enter into that, the concept from Orbiting the Giant Hairball. Ever heard of that book?
Go ahead.
It's what people miss out. A lot of the creatives read that book and say, look, he's creative and he can do it in an organization. But if you look at it, and he's saying, yeah, but you need to be in orbit.
Yeah.
And ultimately it's that seeing the benefit on both sides of the organization needs to see that you need to have people pulling you to the edge of town.
Yeah.
And the creatives have to see hope that you're actually moving. Those are those pieces that, looking at the top shelf and assuming best intent on that, but also acknowledging small change on both sides.
Yeah. I refer to, and I don't know that I explain it very well, but for me, I think of myself as being in regard to my leadership and creativity, being in the middle of a clock, and if the clock is laying flat, then I'm in the middle of it. And the people that I answer to are at that 11, 12, 1 o'clock position. And the brand new people who are maybe coming into my process for the first time, if it's a new cast member, or, a new designer, they're in that 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock spot. But then I get to those people who are surrounding me. And on the 2 o'clock, the 3 o'clock, and the 4 o'clock positions, those are the people on my team that are surrounding me, but they're pulling me forward. They're pulling me, in a direction that is forward. Meanwhile, I have that 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Those people are behind me and they're with me, but they're pulling me back to stay how things are. And there's value to all of it. I need all of that. I need all of those people around me that are going, no, Rob, hold on, pull back. And then I have other people that are in front of me going, come on, let's go. And I need all of that.
Yeah. So you just did a production of Into the Woods?
Yes.
Is that still going on? Or are they still performing?
No, that is it's a benefit concert. We do every year over the summer. I like to say, just gather a whole bunch of my friends into a room and we put on a show. And we raise money for arts education in Central Florida through Central Florida Community Arts. It ends up always being just a 2-night deal. But yeah, I directed it, and just such an honor to work with these people and get to raise money for such a great cause. It's a 3,100 seat venue. And so to fill that over the course of 2 nights is the equivalent of doing a big, giant, full, long run of a show in terms of ticket sales. So yeah, it's great.
And then you host the Leading Creative podcast. How often do you post new material on that?
I am aiming, oh my goodness, please hold me accountable to this. I am aiming for every Thursday morning.
Okay.
Every Thursday morning, I am hoping that a podcast will arrive in your podcast app from me, of the Leading Creative podcast. Life happens and we get busy, and it's something that is not necessarily my main thing, but I want to. You were talking about habits. I want to be consistent there. That is to think through these concepts of leadership and creativity, to think through them and to write them down and to talk about them, just solidifies it for me. So it's a great habit for me to make sure that I'm doing some of the hard thinking when it comes to these principles, and getting them out there into the world.
Well, if it fits, you can have this audio. So
okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, and thank you. I mean, man, I've got so many things written down of directions that we could go on so many different topics here, but I love that we have long format here. But I don't want it to be too long of a format.
Okay.
So Rob, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me this morning, today on these things. Great topics, great stories.
Thanks,
and
man.
I hope we can do this again.
Absolutely. Anytime. Let me know.